Good day. I'm Marty Walser, also known as Raging Owlbear, and today we're talking about HeroQuest. Milton Bradley's HeroQuest. No, wait. Milton Bradley, no. Parker Brothers? No, no. Hasbro. Yes, Hasbro, who now owns HeroQuest and is crowdfunding the reprint of HeroQuest. And the question we are going to talk about a little bit today is, should you back it? There's a bit of back and forth going on the internet because, nerds like nothing more than fighting over unimportant things when the world is falling apart. Because it's the only thing that keeps our minds off of everything else. So, HeroQuest, it's getting reprinted, it's getting crowdfunded. I don't want to say the KS name because it's not on KS. It's on Hasbro's own portal, their pre-order engine, really. I mean, when you think about it, it's not a crowdfund. Hasbro was probably knew ahead of time it was going to reach funding goal. The question then just becomes, they want to obviously judge the demand for a product like this. So that gets into real quickly. I'll just talk really quickly about why would they crowdfund this. And there's been a lot of people on the net that are like, Hasbro, big company, lots of money. Why are they doing this? So when we look at the product that's being offered, there's $100 price point, and then there's $150 price point, or let's say there's actually $100 price point and then a couple of expansions, which probably in the retail space might be on the $30 range, assuming it was on a normal retail shelf, $25 to $30 probably, maybe even higher than that depending on the minis. So this is a niche product. This is not something that's going to sell out of Target in volume. It's not going to sell in Walmart in volume. Now, they may put it on the shelf there, maybe, but that $100 price point for just the base game is not for the non-hobbyist. It's not a mass market style of game, really. You're getting into that level where, these are hobbyists that are going to buy this, and you may get some mass market, but really this is a niche. This is not a mass market game by any stretch of the imagination. When this came out back in the day with cheap plastic and cardboard and whatnot, they were able to obviously price it relatively, at a price point that would not necessarily scare away all consumers, but it was still, honestly, I don't remember exactly. I should have looked it up, what exactly it retailed for back in the 80s, 90s. But the point is, it was still, was a big product, and to come out with something like that today, especially given that they want to throw minis and all kinds of extra scenarios and stuff like that, that $90 price tag, that $150 price tag, that's not your standard consumer fare. So, of course, it would make sense for them to put up a pre-order. They knew they were going to sell this. It was never any, oh, will it fund? They know what the demand is. The question is they want to know, how do we control our pricing? How do we control our manufacturing costs? And judge demand for a product like this, which is not, again, and not a mass market product. They want to know, do I have to print 1,000 of these or 10,000 of these, or even more? Now, currently the Kickstarter is sitting at about $1.8 million. It's probably easily going to top $2 million. Will it go much higher than that? It's hard to tell because, these campaigns, they jump really high at the beginning and they plateau, and sometimes they get a little right at the end. I don't know if this one's going to pop much past 2 million, but I could be wrong. It'll probably get a little bit towards the end. Maybe it'll get up to 2.5. I don't know if it'll go much beyond that. But who am I? I don't know. Hasbro probably has a much better idea of what their curve is going to look like based on the market. But that's really not what I want to talk about tonight. The question is, where are you as a consumer, and how does this appeal? In the sense of, there are going to be different buyers. There are clearly people who played this when it came out when they were young and want to relive that experience or pass that experience to their children. There are people who have heard about this, but it's been out of print for so long, and secondary copies on the secondary market are way hugely priced. And so they're curious, they want to know more. They're a gamer, and they might be a bit of a nerd collector, if the shoe fits. And they're like, well, I've heard all kinds of stuff about HeroQuest. I've never gotten a chance to play it. I really don't know more about what has been said, except for the occasional, HeroQuest's awesome video on YouTube. You all know who I'm talking about. So there's that consumer who's in the nerd culture, in that gaming culture, and is curious, is HeroQuest curious. And then there's that board gamer culture who may not have a particular attraction towards HeroQuest, but they like other dungeon crawlers. The board game industry is huge, obviously, right now, and they're like, does HeroQuest fit with my needs? So let's talk a little bit more about the system of HeroQuest with my massively beaten up and destroyed box that is not much more than a prop these days. HeroQuest is a basic dungeon crawler. It comes with it comes with your basic board game board that has all these sort of predefined rooms that, as you put the doors and other stuff on the map, you can define an area as being that part of the dungeon. And then, of course, you roll and move through and beat up the monsters and get to the boss fight. It's pretty relatively simple dungeon crawl play. In terms of its complexity, well, you almost have to talk a little bit about what other games were out back when it came out and other games that are out today with a similar level of complexity. And let me sort of start with, let me talk a little bit about the HeroQuest rules themselves. So you have the 4 characters, and if you, with the higher tier, they're going to add a couple of more characters. But in the base game, and then in the $100 tier, there's just the 4 characters, and then the 2 different gender figures for the 4 base characters. You got barbarian, you got wizard, the elf character, the dwarf character. Almost like harkening back to sort of basic D&D. But obviously this was a competitive product at the time in the 80s against other dungeon crawl games like D&D and whatnot. So you have the HeroQuest rules, which pretty simplistic. It's I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a light role-playing game, but it borders on a very rules-light role-playing game. You have a couple of basic stats, your body, which is basically your hit points, and then if you're a spellcaster, you can you have the mind score, body and mind score, and then you have attack dice and defense dice. So yeah, very simplistic body and mind. In that vein, it's almost similar to the Talisman, which has like a spirit and a body, or body and spirit, or strength and spirit, or something along those lines. But even this is much more sort of simplistic, because HeroQuest is a campaign board game. Talisman is the monopoly of dungeon crawlers. It has this round board that you run around to collect all your stuff and try to level, try to get enough equipment so you can go to the middle and try to win the game. HeroQuest is deeper than that. it is a campaign style game. There's the quest booklets, you know, and then of course the higher tier. This is the base game quest booklet from the obviously Milton Bradley copy, and then there's the Keller's Keep and the Witch King, Witch Lord quest books, which you know also were from the expansions back in the day, which they're also reprinting for the higher tier. And you know, to give you an idea, if you're not that familiar with the HeroQuest system, you know, it gives you the dungeon layout for the board. So you have your board, and then this defines which rooms are in this particular scenario, and you know, and it gives the GM player, the Overlord or Xandor or whatever they call it. Overlord is from Descent. You know, it tells you what the scenario is, where the monsters are, where the traps are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you lay that stuff up for the players, and you know, again, they run through the dungeon and try to beat up stuff, get to the end boss. So it's a fairly simplistic dungeon crawler, but it is a campaign mode. You gain gold, you can upgrade your equipment, your character advances. So again, it's very close to a very light role-playing game. Obviously, you can't create your own characters. There's no character creation system. But that said, you know, the mechanics are simple enough that you could model some basic changes to the characters and create. Oh, this is an archer class, or this is, you know. And again, they're going to come out. The higher tier is going to come out with a druid, and then it has a warlock character, and there may be other unlocks. The heroic tier is going to have the 2 quest books that were from the old game, and then there's an additional quest book being written by Steve Baker, which and another one which hasn't been teased on the website yet because I think the stretch goal is not on there. But Teos Abadia, also known, sorry Teos if I butcher your last name, who's also known as Alpha Stream on Twitter, has apparently written a scenario. He obviously isn't allowed to say anything about it other than what is already on the website, but clearly it says on the website that I wrote the scenario, and so hopefully that'll be revealed in the stretch goals in the very near future. So yes, so getting back to it, there's spells, there's equipment. So yeah, it borderlines, it walks a very fine line between a board game and a very light role-playing game. So getting back to that question, the complexity. You know, again, Talisman has a similar character thing where you have 2 stats, body and spirit or whatnot. But again, there's no sort of advanced quest. It's the same game. It's the Monopoly. It's the race to the middle. Then you look at some of the games that were from TSR and actually are still being reprinted by Hasbro. The Venerable Dungeon, which is a very introductory dungeon crawly board game. You run into the dungeon, you kill monsters, you try to collect treasure, and then once you've hit the win condition of X number of dollars in treasure, X number of gold pieces, you run back to the entrance, and whoever wins the race wins. You know, and this is a very basic, simplistic game, and this is obviously the older version, but it is in print today, or at least it's still available because they reprinted it several years ago, and it's still available. For the younger gamer, you can introduce your preteens to Dungeon very easily. Stepping up from that is something like the newer D&D board games, Wrath of Ashardalon, Legend of Drizz't, yeah, the Drow guy, Curse of Strahd, Temple of Elemental Evil, but basically the D&D board games where it is also a dungeon crawler, but you move and you place tiles, and again, there's some light scenarios, but they're not really. Some of the newer ones have a little bit of campaign play, which they started with the Temple of Elemental Evil, but you know, the older ones are not. it's not really campaign play. You can level up your person a little bit, and you keep some equipment, but it's not like a progression. It's not really, you don't have a character progression like you do with some of the other dungeon crawlers as much. Um, so yeah, you start out with something like Dungeon, you move up to something like Wrath of Ashardalon, then you have something like Descent, which will probably, HeroQuest will probably be compared to Descent the most, because it's maybe the closest in style. Now, Descent is obviously was made much later, so it has more modern mechanics, um, more bells and whistles. It also was miniatures heavy in the this is the first edition version. The second edition, I think, was pretty miniatures heavy as well. I don't have a copy of that one. Um, and then you go all the way up to sword and sorcery and stuff like that until you get to another big box one like Gloomhaven, which is interesting in that it is a dungeon crawler, just like sword and sorcery. But this has a very much a Euro game component to it, in the sense that you are really trying to play the puzzle of your resources. You have a certain number of resources in terms of your power cards, and you're trying to utilize them in the best possible way to get to the end of the scenario and survive it. So it's not quite, while it has an RPG like feel, because it has a story behind it, stuff like that, it still isn't quite the same as playing some of the other dungeon crawlers, which feel a little bit closer to more of a role-playing game. And again, there's levels, and I tried to talk to them in the complexity, starting with dungeon, you know, moving up to the D&D board games, moving up to Descent, and then going to Gloomhaven. So when you look at something like HeroQuest, game mechanically wise, it sits above obviously something like Dungeon. It sits above Talisman, way above Dungeon. It's right along the lines of the D&D board games in terms of complexity, but it has a little bit more RPG in it because of the advancement portion of it, and because the quest booklets are they're an arcing quest. They're many scenarios. It is about equivalent to Descent, but again, Descent has a little bit, because it's a newer game with newer mechanics, some of the stuff like that. Descent is a little bit more advanced than, say, something like HeroQuest, and it is below complexity than Gloomhaven. But again, Gloomhaven is a campaign mode. Obviously, your characters advance. I'm not sure how to really compare them, because Gloomhaven, while it has RPG elements in it, it feels less like an RPG than some of the other dungeon crawl games, which are trying to recreate some of that RPG experience. Gloomhaven, I think, sits in its own sort of area because of the nature of the card play mechanics. Again, it's hard to make a real apples to apples comparison with all these, because they all have different aspects. But I really do feel like HeroQuest is borderline RPG more than some of the others, although it is still a board game. Okay, so that's it. That at least tries to give you the overview of sort of where it sits in the hierarchy of dungeon crawlers. And I didn't really talk about Sword and Sorcery. I've only played that a couple times. I don't own it. There's also Shadows of Brimstone, which is Wild West themed. That's pretty cool. There's several that I know I'm missing, but that's not the scope of this video. So, getting back to HeroQuest. So who does it appeal to, seeing as how it's at that level? The one thing that I think something like Wrath of Ashardalon has, and HeroQuest has, that some of the others don't, is to the young D&D gamer or approaching the D&D gamer, I would absolutely play Wrath of Ashardalon and play HeroQuest with my preteen kids, anywhere from the 8 to 12 range, stuff like that. Gloomhaven is not gonna get them. It's just the strategy is just too deep, which is great if that's what you're looking for. Absolutely, I love Gloomhaven. It's a really great game. Playing through the campaign, well, until COVID, I've been playing through the campaign with some friends. I'm probably gonna pick up Jaws of the Lion, which I don't have yet, to play with my wife while we wait through pandemic and whatnot. No, assuming we have the time. And that would be great, I think, for definitely older, teens who are into the dungeon crawling stuff, who are also into thinky, pretty thinky games. Descent, I think, is even more thinky than obviously Wrath of Ashardalon or HeroQuest is. And again, it comes a little bit down to the way the mechanics are. Descent also plays in a way that to really get into the strategy of Descent, especially the way the monsters spawn and the way the quests are, you have to understand the best way to minimize your risk in the game. The best way to keep monsters from spawning and overwhelming you. The best way to quickly get to the objective before you get overwhelmed. The Rebel Assault is similar. The longer you take, the more things are going to work against you. And that's part of their allure is the strategy of working through the challenge of getting to the objective before it gets too overwhelming. And actually, I have to say, like, Wrath of Ashardalon has that as well. HeroQuest has that to some degree, but definitely not as much. For those reasons, because the strategy isn't quite as deep or as adult, I know that's a bad terminology, but because I think it's friendlier. Those games, Wrath of Ashardalon and HeroQuest, are friendlier to the younger gamers, to younger board gamers, to younger D&D gamers, because it's more kick in the door, let's kill some stuff, and let's just move to the dungeon, and yeah, you have to move fast, and you have to make sure you want to get to your objective, but you're not having to really think out your turns as deeply. You're just kind of having fun, throwing dice and doing stuff, and obviously the randomness of the dice plays very heavily into that. Gloomhaven doesn't have that level of randomness. Gloomhaven is very deeply thinky. Wrath of Ashardalon, HeroQuest, not so much. They're just fun, frolicky dungeon crawlers, as it were. So when you are thinking about, hey, should I back this? If you have younger kids, yeah, they'll probably dig it. And you want to introduce them to a D&D-like game without overwhelming them with complexity, and something you can throw on the table, play in a couple hours, and be done. Because D&D is that next level of commitment. A board game is less intimidating for the younger audience, and something like HeroQuest is great for a young gamer. You're trying to say, what, let's play a D&D like game. Maybe they've seen you play D&D, and they're young, and they're like, I want to play D&D, but it's easy to bring them in when they're younger gamers. And sometimes it's fun, even as adults, to just play something that isn't thinky. You just want to beat up some monsters. You don't have a regular group that plays D&D. You want to just be able to have a couple people over when that becomes possible, or for those people who are distancing, with other friends who are also distancing, and they are still able to get together because they're cut themselves off from the rest of the world except for each other. You know, HeroQuest can be great fun to just throw out on the table, play it. You just don't think too hard about it, um, and there you have it. So in terms of how it's going to appeal to you, you have to think about that. Where am I in that range? If I want something really much more thinking, again, these modern dungeon crawlers, the new Descent, Gloomhaven, the Jaws of the Lion version of the Gloomhaven, which is much cheaper and more contained, um, you know, Shadows of Brimstone, Sword and Sorcery. If you want a dungeon crawler that's just more challenging for the older adults that you're playing with, then maybe HeroQuest is not in your wheelhouse. But there's a big caveat to that. Let's set aside mechanics for a minute. Let's talk about what you actually get in the different tiers. So, this is a picture of the heroic inclusion. There are, in the HeroQuest, in the base tier, I'll get to that $150, but in the base $99 tier, you've got 40 minis that are the heroes and monsters, roughly 9 or 10, 9 hero minis. Granted, 4 of them are the same, just gender swapped. And then goblins, orcs, zombies, skeletons, fish people, deep ones, or Yuan-Ti, or not Yuan-Ti, sorry, Koatoa, as it were. Cthulhu-esque deep ones. So 30 monster minis, 9 heroes, 30 more pieces of various dungeon decor, although some of those pieces are small. So you get, in a $100 box, a lot of minis. And if you think of 30 monster minis plus 10 heroes, roughly speaking, and you look at something like a dungeon decor box, which can cost anywhere from $20 to $40, depending upon all the contents, and you get, your little altar with a book on it, and you got the tomb guy, and bookshelves, and and these are the old ones made of cardboard and a little bit of plastic at the top. And the new ones are going to be all plastic. You go to the Whiz Kids, look at their deep cut stuff. They have the castle. One of them that came out was a castle barracks stuff. So there's like bunk beds and things that you would find in a soldier's barracks. There's the townspeople plus some of the town various accoutrements. But yeah, those sets that come with furniture, dungeon furniture, or townspeople furniture or whatnot, run anywhere from $25 to $40. So you have the furniture and you have the minis all in $100 box. So you could throw out the quest booklet, throw out the rules. I am playing D&D and I need skeletons, zombies, orcs, goblins, some heroes, stuff like that. $100. It's not a bad deal just for the minis. That 150 tier, you're getting a lot of more copies of the same minis, so the variety goes down a little bit, but you're probably going to get a couple of villain minis, and maybe a few others that are going to be different from the base set. There's also going to be stretch goals. They're going to throw in more goblins. There's other stuff that they're going to hit as they climb up. Again, we don't know how high this is going to go. But again, stepping away from mechanics and just looking at the miniatures, it's not a bad deal just for the minis. Because, you're going to pay if you want orcs and you want skeletons and you want goblins, you want mummies. These are pretty basic minis that you will be able to use in any fantasy tabletop role playing game. They are the basics. You know, whether you play D&D or Pathfinder, Fantasy Age, you know, GURPS Fantasy with the new GURPS Dungeon Fantasy. You know, these are your base creatures. Um, so, and you get 30 of the monsters, and again, few of the heroes. From that perspective, even just backing that basic tier, $100 is not bad, and you get the board game with it. Now, step up to that 150 tier. This is where it gets a little bit more difficult. If you really like HeroQuest, you're going to get the 2 more scenario booklets. I mean, if you think you're already predisposed to like this game, get the 2 more hero booklets. There's potentially 2 more coming. Well, definitely 1 more because they're going to hit 2 million. There's no doubt about it. I'm interested to see what Teos has written, because I like his work. Um, so that could be 4 quest books in total with the stretch goals. We don't know how many more miniatures are going to get added on. Probably only a small amount, but you know, again, lots of skeletons, more zombies. The 150 is just a little bit harder to justify if money's tight right now. Obviously, even the $100, you know, I'm sitting on the fence. I have the older copies. The rules aren't going to change from what I've been hearing. You know, they're probably going to may fix any things that in the old game were considered broken. So they might tweak some things, but in general, the rules are going to be pretty much the same. They're going to be basically compatible with the Milton Bradley version of the game. With, again, just things that people have learned over the years to homebrew themselves or to fix themselves. So at $150, I mean, it's a lot of content. It's three of these quest booklets, you know, and the quest chains. I mean, there's a lot of the different, you know, dungeon layouts. Will they feel a little bit samey after a while? Yeah, possibly. You know, I think sometimes even Gloomhaven has that problem with a lot of people. You know, there's like 100 scenarios in that book, and granted, you don't play them all, but after a while, they're going to start to get samey. And the way they fix that problem is that you retire one character and you play a new character which has different powers. So the sameness of the combat is changed by the change in the player's character, in the PC, as it were, rather than the monsters themselves feeling very similar. Although, you know, obviously as you get higher in power, a lot of those boss monsters have all kinds of crazy powers, stuff like that. It's beyond the scope of this discussion. Anyways, I've been going on for a while. Do you back it? Where do you sit? Are you a casual gamer who's interested in a D&D, almost D&D experience in board games? If you're a hardcore board gamer and you're familiar with these other dungeon crawlers, it may not appeal to you. You know, because it may not be deep enough for you. If you're more casual board gamer and you want something that's a D&D light style of game, or you're just like, you know what, I can't turn down those minis. Yeah, that $100 tier is pretty attractive. So then the question becomes, do I want the stretch goals? Do I want the extra scenarios? I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is the complexity is going to be roughly the level of this, less than something like Descent. They're certainly less than Gloomhaven. But it's going to have a campaign mode. It's going to feel like a light RPG in some ways. Ask yourself, does that appeal to you? For me, if money weren't tight, yeah, probably get it. You know, I have the old stuff. That's a lot of nice minis. Upgrade from, oh yeah, upgrade all this old cardboard to plastic, which I can paint, or um, sure, yeah. This this stuff actually gets a lot of play in my D&D games prior to the pandemic. I use the HeroQuest stuff as dungeon decor all the time. Um, so from that perspective, yeah, the new stuff would be a win, absolutely at that $100 level. $150 I'd have to think about. I don't know if I'll back it, honestly. I'd like to. I think it'd be cool to get the new minis, but it's a lot of money to spend to have to wait, months and months. Honestly, I don't know when the delivery is. Somebody told me it was next fall. I checked on the website. I didn't see exactly when it was going to be, but that's just me being unfortunately a little bit sloppy. So I'm going to wrap it up here because I went on way too long for what should be a relatively simple topic. You're going to have to see. It depends. I hope that maybe I offered a little bit of clarity of where you are as a consumer and where it sits in comparison with some of the other dungeon crawlers. And if you like Wrath of Ashardalon, you'll probably like HeroQuest. They have a different feel. If you're heavy into Gloomhaven and you want something that heavy, HeroQuest is not going to be heavy enough for you. A lot of new dungeon crawlers are better than what used to be just because game mechanics and style has changed over the last 30 years. So that's pretty much it. I'm Marty Walser, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media. Please like, subscribe, do all that stuff, which I probably should have said 30 minutes ago before everybody tuned me out. So I hope you have a good day, and consider HeroQuest. That's it for me. So have a good day.